learning how to breathe again. In the end, it was not about the money that was stolen or the reputation that was tarnished. It was about being the person who does not bail when things get heavy. It was about showing up, even when you have to move your car every Tuesday for street cleaning. It was about family, in all its messy, smelly, and wonderful glory. The morning sun over the city of Toledo brought with it the typical bustle of civic life, but for Councilwoman Melissa Burke, it carried the weight of 1,000 small crises. She sat before the cameras for her morning news segment, projecting an image of calm authority. To the public, she was the epitome of a dedicated servant, a woman who balanced the complexities of local government with a grace that seemed effortless. Her interviewer noted that she was a public servant by day and a striking presence by night. Melissa replied with a practiced smile, stating that she had to turn on the heat during the day or nothing would ever get accomplished. The news cycle shifted to the latest council story. The city had decided to cap elementary school class sizes at 22 students, a move that Melissa championed as a victory for education. However, the victory came with a cost. The reduction in trash service, now limited to once a week, was the financial engine driving the smaller classes. This decision had not sat well with everyone. A local man, his face flushed with anger, confronted her at a public forum. He called the plan garbage, literally and figuratively, pointing out that trash was piling up in front of his restaurant. Melissa watched the footage later with her friend and assistant. She marveled at her own restraint. Despite a man wielding trash bags and shouting at her, she had remained the mature and rational adult. She couldn't help but offer a small, private jab at the television screen, telling the garbage man to suck it. But her moment of triumph was short-lived. The next person on the screen was a man who looked familiar, a man whose life had been upended by the actions of her own family. The man on the screen was Joseph Longo. He was loud, he was frustrated, and he was demanding to know the whereabouts of the money that Melissa's brother-in-law had stolen. Melissa's sister was in prison, and her brother-in-law was a fugitive, having fled the country after a massive financial scandal. Melissa tried to distance herself from the chaos, asking the room if anyone else had a relative they were not exactly proud of. It was a fair point, but it didn't change the reality of her situation. She was now the legal guardian of her niece, Lennox, and her nephew, Ryder, and her life was no longer her own. At her home, the transition was proving to be anything but smooth. Lennox, at 15 years old, was a whirlwind of teenage angst and creative rebellion. Ryder, younger and more internalized, expressed his frustration in more explosive ways. Melissa struggled to find the balance between being an aunt and being a parent. She found herself putting furniture in Lennox's room, hoping to make the girl feel at home, only to be met with cold indifference. Lennox preferred her suitcases, a sign that she viewed her stay as temporary and unwelcome. Melissa lamented to her friend that she used to be the cool aunt. They used to talk about getting matching tattoos and sneaking out of the house. Now, she was the one enforcing the rules, the one saying because I said so. She felt like a monster for simply trying to provide structure. Her friend reminded her of her own rebellious years, though Melissa admitted those memories were a bit blurry, perhaps due to the amount of drinking she did back then. The household was further complicated by the arrival of the children's history. Ryder had a history of setting things on fire when he was angry. After his father ran off, he had stacked 20 of his father's expensive suits in the driveway, doused them in top-shelf cognac, and lit them up. Melissa viewed this as a cry for help, a way of letting things out, but others saw it as a dangerous impulse that needed to be repressed. Desperate for a night of normalcy, Melissa prepared for a date. It had been so long that she felt genuinely nervous. She debated over her outfit, wondering if her clothes said smart and independent politician or former bad girl. But her plans were derailed by a phone call from the school principal, Miss Lunt. Lennox had been suspended. The girl had handed out flyers at school containing an original poem that rhymed the principal's name in an unflattering and creative way. The story was already hitting the local news. Melissa, the woman responsible for capping class sizes and promoting education, now had a niece who was a primary source of schoolyard scandal. The pressure was mounting. Her friends suggested hiring a professional and organizer, someone to bring structure and discipline to the household. Melissa insisted she could do it all, but deep down, she knew she was drowning. She confronted Lennox, trying to bridge the gap and understand why the girl was acting out. Lennox was defiant, calling Miss Lunt a fascist and refusing to apologize. She declared that she simply wouldn't go back to school if an apology was the price of admission. While Melissa was dealing with the fallout at home, Joseph Longo appeared at her door. He had come to apologize for his behavior at City Hall, admitting he had been a jackass for crashing her meeting. But the apology was a thin veil for his true intention: finding his money. He shouted the name of a country, Bolivia, suspecting that was where her brother-in-law was hiding. Melissa flinched, but she insisted she had no idea where the man was. Melissa's date, Griffin, arrived amidst the chaos. He smelled of expensive cologne and represented the evening she had been longing for. However, with Lennox in crisis and Joseph Longo on her doorstep, she knew she couldn't leave. She told Griffin she had a niece in crisis and couldn't go on the date. To make it up to him, she kissed him with such intensity that she joked it should hold him over for at least a few weeks. The following morning, Joseph returned. This time, he wasn't there to shout. He had gone through the city budget and found a way to save money. He proposed that if Melissa hired him to manage the city's funds, he could double the rate of return, providing enough money for both smaller class sizes and more garbage pickups. Melissa pointed out that she couldn't hire him for a city position due to a hiring freeze, and besides, he was a lunatic in her eyes. Joseph's situation was dire. He had lost his job, his condo, and his car was about to be repossessed. Even his wife had left him. He was effectively homeless, living out of his car. Melissa, realizing she needed help and that Joseph needed a job, saw a potential solution. She needed a nanny, someone to manage the children and the house. Joseph, desperate and having experience running a youth center after college, was a candidate she hadn't considered. The interview was unconventional. Melissa questioned if he could handle the kids, and Joseph countered by asking about the salary, which he described as low. They sparred over expectations and gender roles, with Joseph mocking the idea that only women could be nannies. The tension was interrupted by the news that the school buses weren't running due to a garbage protest on Jackson Street. Melissa was stuck. She had meetings she couldn't miss. Joseph stepped up, offering to take Ryder to school in his Porsche, which he only had for 10 more days. Melissa reluctantly agreed. As they left, her friend asked when she was going to interview a real nanny. Melissa watched them go, noting that Joseph was a homeless commodities trader who was now taking care of her kids. The dynamic in the house began to shift. Joseph was not a typical nanny. He was firm, demanding that the children do their own laundry and stop living like pigs. He found Ryder at home in the middle of the day and discovered the boy hadn't written his history paper. Instead of letting him slide, Joseph forced him to stay in his room until the paper was finished. Melissa was shocked by this display of discipline, but she couldn't deny its effectiveness. However, Lennox was still a problem. She had skipped the scheduled meeting with Miss Lunt. Joseph tracked her down to her hiding spot, a place where she went for her adolescent brooding. He didn't turn her in or judge her. Instead, he spoke to her as an equal, an outlaw of sorts. He listened to her frustrations about the music teacher being fired and the unfairness of her parents leaving. Joseph used a unique brand of logic to convince Lennox to face her problems. He asked her if it was fair that her aunt had to go to the school and eat a big bowl of stink for something she didn't do. The metaphor resonated with Lennox. She returned to the school, offered a sincere apology to Miss Lunt, and even defended her aunt, acknowledging that Melissa was at least trying. When they returned home, Melissa was stunned. She wanted to know how Joseph had convinced Lennox to go through with the apology. Joseph claimed it was his natural charm, but he eventually admitted he had paid the girl $50. Melissa was horrified by the bribe, calling it horrible parenting. Joseph reminded her that he wasn't a parent, and neither was she. He had written Lennox a personal check, which he viewed as a valuable life lesson in negotiation. Despite his unorthodox methods, Joseph had achieved results. Lennox had said nice things about Melissa for the first time. The house felt, for a fleeting moment, like it was coming together. Melissa decided to give the arrangement a shot. She told Joseph they would try it out, wondering how bad he could possibly be. The first night was a success in its own way. Melissa returned from her day to find that the kids were in bed, though Lennox had stayed up until 1:30 in the morning. Joseph had helped them with their schoolwork and even watched a few episodes of a popular television show with them. He was managing the chaos in a way Melissa hadn't been able to. As the night drew to a close, a massive man arrived at the door, part of a delivery or perhaps a lingering protest. Joseph, ever the protector, alerted Melissa to the man's presence. The house was full of unexpected people and strange new rules, but as Melissa looked around, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in the struggle. The journey of this unconventional family was just beginning, filled with the promise of laughter, learning, and the slow, steady process of healing. Every day brought a new set of challenges. Melissa continued to navigate the treacherous waters of local politics, often finding that the lessons she learned at home with the children and Joseph were more applicable to the council chamber than she had ever imagined. Joseph, in turn, found a new sense of purpose in the domestic sphere, proving that even a former titan of finance could find fulfillment in the simple act of making a sandwich or ensuring a history paper was completed on time. The children, Lennox and Ryder, began to see that their new life, while different from the one they had known, was built on a foundation of genuine care. They learned that being a family wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, even when things got messy. And in the Burke household, things were often very messy, but they were also filled with a new kind of light. Melissa realized that her role as a public servant didn't stop at the steps of City Hall. It extended to the two young people living under her roof and the man who had unexpectedly become their anchor. Together, they were building something resilient and beautiful, a testament to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The story of Melissa